5 German fighters circle above him like wolves. The engine of his P-47 Thunderbolt screams at full throttle. The cockpit vibrates with power. The sky around him is empty. His wingmen are already gone. Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson is 23 years old, alone at 18,000 feet, and everyone in his squadron once joked that he thought too much to survive a dogfight. Now thinking is the only thing keeping him alive. Above him, 5 Messerschmitt Bf-109 spread into a hunting formation. Patient, experienced, certain of the outcome. They believe they are about to kill another American fighter pilot. Johnson believes something else entirely. He believes the answer lies in geometry. Spring, 1943. The air war over Europe has become a brutal equation that no one has managed to solve. American bombers fly into Germany every day, massive formations of B-17 flying fortresses pushing deeper into hostile skies. Their aluminum bodies glitter in the sunlight like a slow parade of targets. German fighters rise to meet them, and the results are devastating. Bomber crews die at rates that make statisticians uncomfortable. For every 100 men sent to England, projections say nearly 30 will never come home. With every mission, the odds worsen. By the 10th sortie, survival feels less likely than a coin landing on its edge. Fighter escorts are supposed to change that. But the Luftwaffe knows its own sky. German pilots have been fighting since the beginning of the war: Poland, France, the Mediterranean, Russia. They recognize hesitation in a turn, weakness in a climb, panic in a dive. And they exploit it without mercy. The American escort fighter in 1943 is the P-47 Thunderbolt. It is enormous. 7 tons of steel, armor, fuel, and engine power. The Thunderbolt is incredibly tough and astonishingly fast in a dive. But in a turning fight, it becomes a liability. German fighters, the Messerschmitt 109 and the Focke-Wulf 190, are lighter and more agile. They can turn tighter and climb faster. German tactics are simple. Force American fighters into horizontal maneuvering fights. Bleed their energy, then spiral around them until the heavier aircraft stalls. Once a Thunderbolt slows down, it becomes easy prey. American pilots know this. They read it in manuals. They hear it repeated during briefings. Never turn with a 109. Never fight alone. Never dive without separation. Everyone learns the rules. And still men die. The 56th Fighter Group, stationed in England, escorts bombers over occupied Europe. Its pilots are young. Some grew up on farms. Some studied engineering. Some barely finished high school. All of them have watched friends fall from the sky trailing smoke. Among them is a pilot who seems different. Not braver, not faster, but different. Because before he ever sat in a cockpit, he sat in a classroom where a professor drew angles on a chalkboard and explained how objects move through space. His name is Robert S. Johnson, and half the squadron calls him Classroom Kid. Not as praise. Johnson asks too many questions. During briefings, he studies charts instead of joking with the others. He sketches diagrams in the margins of his mission notes. Angles, trajectories, intercept paths, while other pilots drink coffee or complain about the weather. To many of them, fighting is instinct. A reaction. A feeling. Johnson treats it like an equation. He grew up in Lawton, Oklahoma, a dusty town where strong wind rattles windows and people fix their own machines because no one else will. Johnson liked machines. He liked understanding how things worked. He enrolled at Cameron Junior College and studied engineering. Physics fascinated him, especially the parts you could see. How a wing generates lift. How gravity accelerates objects. How energy moves through systems. One day his professor performed a simple demonstration. He dropped a marble and a wrench from shoulder height. They hit the floor at the exact same moment. Johnson stared at them for a long time. Because the universe had just revealed something important. Physics does not negotiate. When war came, Johnson joined the Army Air Forces. Not because he dreamed of heroism, but because airplanes made sense. Lift, drag, thrust, weight. For forces controlling everything. Flight obeyed rules. And rules could be understood. Training was harder than he expected. Johnson was precise, but slow to react. Instructors complained that he thought through maneuvers before performing them. In combat, they warned, there would be no time to think. Johnson graduated anyway. He was assigned to the 61st Fighter Squadron of the 56th Fighter Group and sent to England in early 1943. Clean-shaven, quiet, The veterans looked him over and quietly made their predictions. Nice kid. Probably wouldn't last long. His first missions were uneventful. He stayed in formation, followed orders, avoided getting separated. He didn't panic, but he also didn't shoot anyone down. Other pilots scored victories within their first week. Johnson returned to base with burned fuel stains on his gloves and a notebook full of sketches. The others teased him. "What are you drawing in there?" someone asked one evening. "Flight paths," Johnson answered. "Intercept angles. Relative velocity in a dive." They laughed. Not cruelly, just dismissively. One pilot told him the sky wasn't a classroom. Another told him to stop thinking and start shooting. Johnson nodded politely, but he kept drawing, because he had begun noticing something. Patterns. German fighters attacked using predictable geometry, angles of approach, dive paths, escape routes. And Johnson suspected something important. If those patterns could be predicted, they could also be broken, or turned into a trap. The problem was altitude. German pilots almost always started higher. They hit above the bomber stream or in the glare of the sun, invisible until the moment they attacked. When they dove, they came down with tremendous energy. American fighters could not climb quickly enough to meet them. If you turned to evade, they tightened the spiral. If you dove away, they followed. Because they started higher, they entered the dive with more speed. Eventually, they closed the distance and fired. The manual warned about this constantly. Never dive without separation. Otherwise, you were simply dying in a straight line. But Johnson kept thinking about the marble and the wrench. Gravity accelerates objects equally, but drag in the air behaves differently. At high altitude, the air is thin, and a heavier object moving vertically experiences proportionally less drag than a lighter one. The P-47 Thunderbolt weighed more than 7 tons. A Messerschmitt 109 weighed barely half that, which meant something strange. In a true vertical dive, the Thunderbolt might actually fall faster. Not because of engine power, because of inertia. Johnson studied performance charts. He read engineering reports. He drew velocity curves in his notebook. On paper, the idea worked. If a Thunderbolt committed to a steep enough dive, gravity would accelerate it faster than the lighter German fighters could follow. But no one did this in combat. A near-vertical dive was terrifying. The airspeed indicator would redline. The controls would stiffen. The wings might fail. Pull out too hard, and you could black out, or rip the aircraft apart. Misjudge the altitude, and you became a crater. So the idea remained theoretical. Interesting on paper. Suicidal in practice. Johnson mentioned it once during a briefing. He suggested that a vertical dive might create enough separation to escape multiple attackers. The operations officer listened patiently, then reminded Johnson that such a dive exceeded safety margins and could easily kill the pilot attempting it. In other words, don't try it. Johnson accepted the criticism. He filed the idea away, but the losses continued. Good pilots, careful pilots, pilots who followed every rule, and still died. So Johnson kept sketching angles in his notebook, and he wondered what would happen if someone ignored the manual and trusted the math instead. June 26, 1943. A bomber escort mission over occupied Europe. The weather is hazy. The bomber formation stretches across the sky, and somewhere above them, German fighters are already watching, waiting for a single Thunderbolt to become separated, for one pilot to face a problem no manual can solve, and for Robert Johnson to discover whether his calculations were right. Below them stretches the bomber formation. Dozens of B-17 flying fortresses, silver wings reflecting the thin sunlight of high altitude. From a distance, the formation almost looks calm, orderly, peaceful. But every pilot in the sky knows what it really is. A slow procession of targets. The 56th Fighter Group flies top cover above the bombers, weaving slowly across the sky. Each pilot scans constantly, above, behind, toward the sun, looking for the faint glint that might reveal an approaching enemy. Robert Johnson sits inside the cockpit of his Thunderbolt, Penrod and Sam, the name painted in white beneath the canopy. He has flown this airplane for nearly 2 months now. He knows her habits. He knows the slight vibration that appears above 380 miles per hour. He knows how the control stick stiffens when the airspeed climbs too high. He knows the sound the engine makes when it begins running hot. The Thunderbolt is not graceful, but it is powerful, and Johnson trusts machines that obey the laws of physics. The radio remains quiet. Too quiet. Then suddenly the call bursts across the channel. Bandits. Hi. 8 o'clock. Johnson twists in his seat, craning his neck toward the pale sky. At first he sees nothing. Then small flashes appear in the distance. Tiny metallic sparks reflecting sunlight. They grow larger rapidly. Dots become shapes. Shapes become aircraft. Focke-Wulf 190s. They roll over and dive. The sky erupts into motion. American fighters break formation instantly, engines roaring as they maneuver to intercept the attackers. Contrails twist across the sky. Tracer rounds streak like burning threads between aircraft. Johnson pulls hard to stay with his element leader. The G-forces slam into him. His vision narrows into a gray tunnel. For a moment, the edges of the world disappear. He blinks hard, forcing himself to breathe. Slowly, the darkness fades. But when his sight clears, his leader is gone. Johnson scans the sky. Left, right, above, empty. For a few seconds, the air around him seems strangely quiet. Then instinct forces him to glance behind. His stomach tightens. 5 fighters. Messerschmitt Bf 109s. They climb toward him in a loose formation. Not rushing. Not reckless. Patient. They know he is alone. Johnson's pulse pounds inside his helmet. His gloves feel damp with sweat. But panic is useless. He begins calculating. Climbing will not work. The Messerschmitt climbs better. Turning will not work. The Thunderbolt cannot match their agility. Flying straight will only allow them to close the distance. The manual says to call for help. He switches the radio channel. But the airwaves are chaos. Every American pilot in the sky is already fighting his own battle. No one is coming. Johnson inhales slowly. He remembers the notebook. The diagrams. The equations. The marble and the wrench striking the floor at the same moment. And suddenly he realizes something. He has one advantage. Massachusetts Johnson rolls the Thunderbolt upside down. The horizon flips. The earth now hangs above him like a giant map of fields and villages. Then he pushes the control stick forward. Hard. The nose drops. The altimeter begins unwinding rapidly. The Thunderbolt falls. This is not a shallow dive. Not the controlled descent taught in training. This is almost vertical. The airspeed indicator climbs rapidly. 300 miles per hour. 350, 400. The engine roars like thunder. Wind screams across the canopy. The aircraft begins to shudder violently. Johnson's teeth vibrate. The control stick grows heavy in his hands. The Thunderbolt does not want to dive this steeply, but Johnson forces it. 450 miles per hour. The needle touches the red line. Beyond this speed, the aircraft might fail. A control surface could tear away. A wing spar might snap. The airplane might simply come apart. But if Johnson pulls out now, the Messerschmitts will catch him. He glances behind. They followed. Of course they did. 5 German fighters plunging nose down after him. Cannons ready. Expecting the same mistake every other pilot has made. They expect him to flatten out. To panic. To try to escape horizontally. And then die. Johnson does not level out. Instead, he pushes the Thunderbolt even steeper. 70 degrees. 80. Nearly straight down now. The earth rushes toward him. Fields. Roads. Farmhouses. Details growing larger every second. Behind him, something begins to change. The German formation spreads apart. Their spacing widens. Their noses begin drifting. They are accustomed to chasing fighters that dive at 50 degrees. Maybe 60. Targets that flatten out after a few thousand feet. But this is not a dive. It is a fall. And the Thunderbolt is accelerating faster than they are. 470 miles per hour. Johnson can barely move the controls now. Air pressure locks the stick in place. His arms tremble from the effort of holding it steady. Sweat stings his eyes. He cannot wipe it away. Both hands remain locked on the controls. The Messerschmitts are lighter aircraft. In a turning fight, that is an advantage. But in a vertical dive, it becomes a weakness. Drag increases with speed, but inertia increases with mass. The Thunderbolt weighs more than 7 tons. And heavy objects fall faster when gravity takes control. Physics does not negotiate. The altimeter spins downward like a broken clock. 15,000 feet. 12,000. Johnson knows he must pull out soon. But not yet. Too early, and they will still reach him. Too late, and he will never pull out at all. 10,000 feet. The ground rises toward him like a wall. Johnson tightens his grip on the control stick. The moment is coming. The moment when calculation must defeat fear. And when the difference between life and death will be measured in angles. Johnson risks another glance over his shoulder. The Messerschmitts are still there. But something has changed. They are no longer closing the distance. Not by much, but enough. Their dive angles are slightly shallower now. Their formation stretched out by the sheer speed of the fall. And their pilots are human. Human beings are not designed to plunge toward the Earth at nearly 500 miles per hour. The altimeter needle is spinning. 8,000 feet. The ground is rushing upward like a fist. Fields and roads expand rapidly beneath him. Johnson knows the moment has come. He begins the pull. Not a violent jerk. A steady, controlled pull. The control stick resists. At this speed, the air itself becomes solid. Johnson grips the stick with both hands. He uses his arms, his shoulders, even the muscles in his back. The Thunderbolt fights him. But slowly the nose begins to rise. 1 degree. 2. 5. The G-forces hit him like a hammer. His body weighs several times its normal mass. Blood drains from his head. The edges of his vision collapse into gray tunnel vision. He grunts and tightens his stomach muscles, forcing blood back toward his brain. The horizon tilts. The Earth rotates away. The sky returns. 6,000 feet. The Thunderbolt levels out, then begins to climb. Johnson gasps for air. His lungs burn. His hands shake uncontrollably. The engine is still screaming at full power. But it is running. The wings are still attached. The aircraft is still flying. Johnson turns his head. The Messerschmitts are gone. Not shot down. Not destroyed. Simply gone. Somewhere far above they are still diving, or leveling out, or searching for a target that no longer exists. The geometry of the fight has broken apart. Johnson is alone again. But this time, he is alive. He turns west. Toward England. Toward home. He checks his fuel gauges. Enough. Barely. The flight back feels strangely quiet. The adrenaline drains slowly from his body. When he finally lands and taxis across the wet English airfield, his hands are still trembling. Johnson shuts down the engine. The cockpit becomes silent. For several minutes, he simply sits there, staring at his hands, trying to steady his breathing, trying to understand what just happened. Later, the intelligence officer debriefs him. Johnson explains the engagement calmly. 5 German fighters. Vertical dive. Separation achieved. No kills, but also no losses. The officer writes everything down without comment. Another report among hundreds from that day. But stories spread quickly among fighter pilots. Other airmen hear what Johnson did. At first they are skeptical. A vertical dive as an escape tactic? That is not doctrine. That sounds like desperation. But Johnson returned alive. And 5 German fighters did not. A few pilots began asking questions. How steep was the dive? How fast did the Thunderbolt go? How did he pull out without tearing the aircraft apart? Johnson tries to explain. He talks about mass, about inertia, about drag, about gravity. Some of them listen carefully. Others shrug and walk away. 3 days later, another pilot tries it. 2 Focke-Wulf 190s catch him alone. Instead of turning, he rolls inverted and dives. Steep, nearly vertical. The Thunderbolt accelerates. The German fighters cannot keep up. He escapes clean. When he lands, he climbs out of the cockpit grinning like a man who has just discovered something extraordinary. Because it worked. Word spreads. Not officially. The manuals remain unchanged. Briefings do not suddenly begin, including lectures about vertical dive physics. But inside ready rooms and dispersal huts, pilots talk. Quietly. The P-47 can now dive anything. If you are trapped, do not turn. Do not climb. Point the nose down. Let gravity fight for you. The tactic saves lives. Not hundreds. Not thousands. But enough. A pilot here. A wingman there. Men who might have died in turning fights instead return home shaken, but alive. Johnson himself uses the maneuver again. July. August. September. Every time the geometry of combat turns against him. He rolls inverted and dives. Every time the Thunderbolt falls like a meteor. Every time he survives. By autumn, no one calls him classroom kid anymore. Now he is simply Bob. Or sometimes just Johnson. Younger pilots occasionally ask him to explain the math. He sketches diagrams on napkins or the backs of maps. Angles, energy, velocity. Some understand. Others simply trust the results. The tactic spreads beyond the 56th Fighter Group. Other Thunderbolt squadrons experiment with it. Pilots compare notes across the 8th Air Force. The Thunderbolt may not turn well, but it dives like a falling building. So use that. Do not fight the enemy's fight. Fight physics. The Luftwaffe eventually notices. German reports begin describing American fighters that suddenly abandon combat and dive almost vertically toward the earth. Some German pilots assume panic. Others recognize it as deliberate. A tactic. It does not win the war, but it changes the equation. It gives American pilots something priceless. An option. A way out when none should exist. Robert Johnson finishes the war with 27 confirmed victories, one of the highest-scoring American aces in Europe. He receives the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, and many other decorations. But the victories are not what he remembers most. Years later, when he writes about the war, he describes something else. Fear. Calculation. The moment when he rolled inverted and trusted something invisible. His body had screamed at him to pull out. His training told him the dive was insane. But another part of his mind remembered a classroom demonstration. A marble, a wrench, falling together under gravity. So he held the stick forward. And the math was right. The vertical dive eventually becomes a quiet footnote in fighter doctrine. It is not glamorous. It does not produce dramatic gun camera footage. It does not win dogfights. But it works. And in war, working is the same thing as surviving. Johnson returns to Oklahoma after the war. He lives a long life. He rarely boasts. When people ask how he survived so many missions, he does not talk about courage or instinct. He talks about angles, about geometry, about trusting numbers even when your body is screaming at you to stop. He dies in 1998 at the age of 78. By then, the Thunderbolt is a museum aircraft. The men who flew it are old or gone. Airliners cross the skies of Europe now, leaving quiet white contrails far above peaceful fields. Passengers look out their windows and think about vacations, or meetings, or the weather. They do not think about dive angles, or gravity, or how fast a 7-ton fighter falls. But the lesson remains. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust something you cannot see. Sometimes survival is not about fighting harder, but thinking more clearly. Sometimes the difference between life and death is nothing more than a notebook full of sketches, and the courage to let go of the horizon. Robert Johnson was once mocked for thinking too much, but thinking is what saved him. Thinking is what brought him home. Because in the end, the sky does not care about instinct. It does not care about bravery. It cares about physics. And physics, if you trust it, does not lie.